My name is Isabella, and for 10 years, my hands were my life. I was a mechanic, a woman who found her purpose in the grease-stained guts of an engine, a life my parents saw as a profound and public embarrassment. They were old money, their world a fortress of country clubs and debutante balls, a world I had gladly left behind. The man I loved, Liam, was a part of that world, but he saw me for who I was, not what my bank account said. When we announced our engagement, my parents delivered their verdict. I was too poor, too common, too unworthy to marry into the powerful family Liam belonged to. They gave me an ultimatum: walk away from the wedding or be cut off forever. What they didn't know, as they planned the lavish wedding I was forbidden to attend, was that the engines I had been secretly working on for the past 3 years weren't in cars. They were in next-generation aerospace drones. And on the day of the wedding, as my parents stood on the perfectly manicured lawn of the most exclusive venue in the state, preparing to celebrate their victory, they heard a sound they never expected. It was the sound of my helicopter, descending from the sky, ready to land and reveal a truth that would not only crash their party, but shatter their entire definition of wealth and power. If you have ever been judged by a price tag you didn't ask for, or had your worth questioned by the people who should have known it all along, then this story is for you. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And before I tell you how I went from being the family grease monkey to the CEO of my own company, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button and ring that notification bell. You're going to want to have a front row seat for this landing. In the gilded cage of the Davenport family, I was the broken songbird. From the moment I was born, I was a disappointment, not because of who I was, but because of what I loved. My parents, Charles and Victoria Davenport, were the self-appointed royalty of our small, affluent Connecticut town. Their lineage was a tapestry woven with threads of old money, Ivy League degrees, and strategic marriages. Their world was one of hushed tones, polished silver, and the quiet, brutal judgment of a society built on appearances. My father was a fourth-generation investment banker, a man who believed a person's character could be found on their balance sheet. My mother was the perfect corporate wife, her life a masterclass in social strategy, her charity work more about networking than altruism. And then there was me. I didn't care for pastel dresses or piano lessons. I was fascinated by the way things worked. I found my magic not in fairy tales, but in the intricate, greasy, beautiful guts of a machine. My temple was my grandfather's garage. He was my mother's father, a brilliant but eccentric aeronautical engineer who was the family's black sheep because he had chosen to work with his hands instead of his inheritance. He saw the same spark in me. While my parents were trying to teach me the proper way to hold a teacup, my grandfather was teaching me the difference between a Phillips head and a flathead screwdriver. He gave me my first toolbox when I was 10. My parents were horrified. "It's unladylike, Arthur," my mother had pleaded with him. "She'll get her hands dirty." "Good," my grandfather had rumbled, a twinkle in his eye. "It's about time someone in this family did." That garage was my sanctuary. It was the only place where I was valued for my curiosity and my competence, not my pedigree. My grandfather passed away when I was 16, leaving me his garage and all of its contents. It was the greatest inheritance I could have ever received. While my peers were preparing for their SATs and planning their debutante balls, I was rebuilding a vintage 1967 Ford Mustang from the ground up. That car became my ticket out. I paid for my state university education, a decision that scandalized my parents, who had expected me to attend their alma mater, Yale, by fixing up and selling old cars. I got a degree in mechanical engineering, a field so unsuitable for a Davenport that my parents rarely mentioned it to their friends. They would just say I was finding myself. After college, I opened my own small, independent auto repair shop. I called it Phoenix Motors, a nod to the way I brought dead cars back to life. It was a humble, two-bay garage, but it was mine. It was honest work, real work. I loved the smell of gasoline and motor oil. I loved the satisfaction of a perfectly tuned engine purring back to life. I was good at it. I built a reputation for being the best, most honest mechanic in town. But to my parents, I might as well have been a coal miner. An auto mechanic, Isabella? My father had said, his voice dripping with a disappointment so profound it was almost comical. After all the advantages we've given you, you're a Davenport. People will talk. They saw my life not as a choice, but as a failure, a public stain on their pristine family name. They would introduce me to their friends with a sigh and a carefully worded explanation. This is our daughter, Isabella. She's very hands-on. It was their code for, she's the help. My success was invisible to them because it wasn't their kind of success. It didn't come with a corner office or a country club membership. It came with grease under my fingernails and the deep, quiet satisfaction of a job well done. I had accepted my role as the family disappointment. I had built a life for myself. A life I was proud of, completely separate from their world of judgment and expectation. I thought I had escaped, and then I met Liam. Liam Sterling was everything my parents' world valued, and everything I thought I disdained. He was the sole heir to the Sterling-Croft fortune, a sprawling empire of manufacturing and tech that was practically royalty in our state. I met him when his vintage Jaguar E-Type, a notoriously finicky machine, broke down on a country road 2 miles from my shop. He had called for a tow, and I was the one who answered. I arrived to find him standing by the side of the road, impeccably dressed in a linen suit, looking more annoyed than distressed. I expected arrogance, entitlement, the kind of condescending attitude I had seen from the wealthy men in my parents' circle my entire life. I was prepared to hate him on sight. But when I got out of my truck, he didn't look down on me. He looked at me with a genuine, almost desperate curiosity. "Can you actually fix this thing?" he'd asked, a wry smile playing on his lips. Because the last 3 mechanics I took it to just sighed and charged me a fortune. "I can fix anything," I'd replied. And it wasn't a boast. It was a simple statement of fact. Over the next week, as I worked on his car, he kept showing up at my garage. He didn't hover or offer unsolicited advice. He would just sit on a stool in the corner, nursing a lukewarm coffee from the machine in my waiting room, and watch me work. He asked questions, real questions, not just about the car, but about me. He was fascinated by the way I could diagnose a problem by sound, by the confident, efficient way my hands moved, by the deep, encyclopedic knowledge I had of the machine before me. He wasn't just looking at the grease-stained mechanic. He was seeing the engineer underneath. He was the first person from that world who had ever looked at my hands and seen skill instead of shame. When the car was finally finished, purring like a kitten, he paid the bill without flinching. "I have a proposition for you," he'd said, leaning against the now perfectly restored Jaguar. "Let me take you to dinner. Somewhere that requires you to get your hands dirty with butter and lobster instead of motor oil." I was hesitant. His world was a minefield I had spent a lifetime learning to navigate and avoid. But there was a kindness in his eyes, a genuine respect that I was not accustomed to, and I found myself saying yes. Our relationship was a quiet, secret rebellion. We fell in love in the spaces between our 2 worlds. He would come to my garage, bringing takeout, and we would eat sitting on overturned milk crates, talking for hours. I would, on rare occasions, agree to go with him to one of his world's events, a charity gala or a gallery opening. I would put on a dress, clean the grease from under my fingernails, and play the part of the quiet, mysterious girlfriend. His friends were polite but distant, their eyes filled with a thinly veiled condescension. They saw me as Liam's exotic little project, a temporary diversion from the suitable heiresses they all assumed he would eventually marry. But Liam never treated me that way. He was fiercely protective, endlessly proud. He would introduce me not as Isabella, but as Isabella, the brilliant mechanical engineer who owns her own business. He saw my work not as a liability, but as my superpower. For 2 years, we kept our relationship mostly to ourselves, a fragile bubble we were afraid to burst. My parents knew I was seeing someone, but I was vague about the details. I knew the moment they heard the name Sterling, they would see him not as a man I loved, but as a social prize, a golden ticket back into the world I had rejected. I was right. Liam, tired of the secrecy, insisted on meeting them. The dinner was a disaster. The moment my parents realized who he was, they transformed. Their polite indifference towards my life was replaced by a fawning, grasping excitement. They weren't interested in our relationship. They were interested in the merger it represented. They saw him as my redemption, the man who could finally pull me out of the grease pit and back into the drawing room where I belonged. They spent the entire evening ignoring me and grilling Liam about his family, his portfolio, his future. It was a business meeting, and I was the asset being traded. After that night, the pressure began. My mother would call me with suggestions for my wardrobe, my hair, my conversation topics. "You have to make an effort, Isabella," she would say. "A man like Liam is used to a certain polish." They didn't understand. Liam hadn't fallen in love with a polished debutante. He had fallen in love with the girl in the garage. 6 months ago, on a quiet evening at the lake house he had come to love as much as I did, Liam asked me to marry him. He didn't have a flashy diamond. He had a ring he had designed himself, a simple, elegant band of platinum with a gear-shaped setting. It was perfect. It was us. The next day we told our families. His family, a warm and unpretentious group who had long since accepted me, were overjoyed. My parents' reaction was a strange, terrifying mixture of elation and panic. They were thrilled by the social coup of their mechanic daughter marrying a Sterling, but they were also horrified at the prospect of presenting me, in my current state, to their world. Their elation quickly curdled into a campaign of control. The small, simple wedding we wanted was out of the question. It had to be a grand affair, a statement. And the first, and most important, statement they wanted to make was that I was no longer a mechanic. They were about to launch a full-scale renovation project, and the first thing to be demolished was my entire identity. The moment the engagement was announced, my life ceased to be my own. It became a project, a brand to be managed, and my parents appointed themselves as the ruthless CEOs of Isabella Incorporated. Their primary objective was to erase every trace of the woman Liam had fallen in love with and replace her with a polished, acceptable, Davenport-worthy bride. It was a slow, brutal, and deeply humiliating campaign, a renovation of a daughter they had always considered to be a fixer-upper. The first thing to go was my business. It was non-negotiable. "You cannot possibly be married to Liam Sterling and still be tinkering with cars," my mother had said, the word tinkering delivered with a delicate shudder, as if I had been performing amateur surgery. "It's unseemly. What will people say?" My father was more direct. "It's a matter of optics, Isabella," he'd explained, as if lecturing a particularly dense intern. "The Sterling family is a dynasty. You are about to become a part of that. You need to look the part. And the part is not a grease monkey." I argued, of course. I told them that my shop was my passion, my creation, the one thing in the world that was truly mine. It didn't matter. They went over my head, directly to Liam. To my shock and hurt, Liam, who had always been so supportive, capitulated. "Issy," he'd said, his voice full of a weary resignation I hadn't heard before. "It's just for a little while. Let's just get through the wedding, keep the peace. Your parents, they're playing a different game. Let's not give them any more ammunition." Reluctantly, heartbroken, I agreed. I put a closed for renovation sign on the door of Phoenix Motors, a painful, ironic lie. I felt like I was boarding up my own soul. With my identity as a mechanic temporarily dismantled, my mother moved on to phase 2, the physical renovation. She booked a series of appointments for me that felt less like wedding prep and more like a deprogramming. There were consultations with stylists who clucked their tongues at my practical wardrobe of jeans and durable work shirts. There were trips to spas, where my calloused, capable hands were scrubbed, buffed, and shellacked into shiny, useless ornaments. There were lessons with an etiquette coach who taught me which fork to use for the fish course and how to make polite, meaningless small talk. I was being sanded down, all my interesting, hard-earned edges smoothed away, until I was as bland and polished as the silver on my mother's dining table. My father's contribution to this project was financial. He and my mother insisted on paying for the wedding, not as a gesture of generosity, but as an act of control. "We need to ensure it's done to a certain standard," he had announced. This standard meant that every decision, from the venue to the flowers to the font on the invitations, was theirs. Liam and I had wanted a small, intimate ceremony at my lake house. They booked the Hawthorne Grand, the most ostentatious and ridiculously expensive country club in the state. We had wanted a simple, elegant dinner. They hired a celebrity chef and planned a 7-course tasting menu. Every detail of our wedding was becoming a testament to their taste, their wealth, their social standing. We were just the props. The most humiliating part of this process was the constant, casual dismissal of my own life and my own resources. One afternoon, my mother and I were at a high-end bridal boutique, trying on dresses that cost more than my first car. I found a simple, beautiful gown that I loved, but my mother immediately vetoed it. "It's not impactful enough," she'd said. She then pointed to a massive jewel-encrusted monstrosity. That one, says Davenport." When the bill for the dress came, my mother made a great show of pulling out her platinum American Express card. "Don't you worry about a thing, darling," she'd said loudly. "For the benefit of the sales staff, Daddy and I are taking care of everything. We know you're not in a position to afford something like this." The condescension was a physical slap in the face. She had no idea about my financial situation. She just assumed, based on my chosen profession, that I was perpetually on the brink of poverty. She saw my simple, debt-free life not as a sign of prudence, but of failure. She was taking care of me not out of love, but out of a desperate need to cover up the shame of my perceived inadequacy. I was a project, a charity case, a fixer-upper they had to pour money into to make her presentable to the world. And the most heartbreaking part was that Liam, caught in the crossfire between the woman he loved and the powerful families he was trying to unite, was letting it all happen. The girl in the garage was being systematically erased, and I was starting to wonder if the man who had fallen in love with her was being erased too. While my public identity was being dismantled and repackaged by my parents, my private life had taken on a new, secret, and exhilarating dimension. The renovation of my auto shop was not a lie, but it was a carefully constructed half-truth. I hadn't been fixing cars. I had been building the future. The story began about 3 years ago, long before I even met Liam. A man had walked into my shop with a strange request. He wasn't a car owner. He was an engineer, a brilliant but eccentric robotics genius named Dr. Eris Thorne. He had seen my work on a complex vintage engine restoration and was impressed by my intuitive understanding of mechanical systems. He was working on a personal project, a prototype for a new kind of autonomous aerial drone. And he needed a mechanical consultant, someone who could help him design and build a more efficient, more powerful propulsion system. He offered me a consulting contract with a strict non-disclosure agreement. I was intrigued. The work was challenging and unlike anything I had ever done before. Our collaboration was a success. The prototype was a breakthrough. A year later, Eris came back to me with a bigger proposition. He had secured a massive, secret research and development grant from a private aerospace and defense contractor. He wanted to start a company, and he wanted me to be his co-founder and head of mechanical engineering. He didn't just want my consulting, he wanted my mind, my hands, my full partnership. We founded Ether Dynamics. We leased a small, anonymous aircraft hangar at a private airfield an hour outside the city. From the outside, it looked like any other hangar. Inside, it was a state-of-the-art research and development lab. For the past 3 years, while I was running Phoenix Motors during the day, I was spending my nights and weekends at that hangar, working with Eris and a small, hand-picked team of brilliant engineers. We weren't just building drones, we were creating a revolution. Our technology, a hybrid electric propulsion system that was almost silent, incredibly efficient, and capable of unprecedented flight times, had the potential to change everything from commercial delivery to search and rescue operations. When my parents forced me to close my shop, it was a blessing in disguise. It gave me the perfect cover story. I told everyone I was taking a sabbatical to reevaluate my career, a story my parents were all too happy to believe. In reality, I started working at Ether Dynamics full-time. The renovations at my old garage were real, but we weren't fixing the car lifts. We were installing a clean room and a 3D printing lab. Phoenix Motors was quietly being transformed into the company's secondary prototype facility. We were on the verge of a major breakthrough, a final successful test of our flagship model, the Seraph One. The successful completion of this test would trigger the final phase of our contract, a multi-$100 million acquisition deal from the defense contractor that had funded us. My stake in the company, as co-founder, was a staggering 20%. I wasn't just financially secure. I was, on paper, a very, very wealthy woman. But it was a secret, paper fortune, a future that was contingent on the success of one final flight. Liam was the only person in the world who knew. He had been my confidant, my cheerleader, my late-night coffee runner during the endless weeks of testing. He was in awe of my work, of the brilliant, secret life I was leading. He understood the stakes. He was the one who had encouraged me to keep it a secret from my parents. "Don't give them another thing to control, Issy," he'd said. "This is yours. Let's get through this wedding. And then, when the deal is done, we'll have our real celebration. On our own terms." I had trusted him. I had believed we were a team, secretly fighting against the tide of my family's expectations together. But as the wedding planning intensified, as I saw him capitulating to my parents' demands again and again, a seed of doubt began to sprout in my mind. Was he really on my team? Or was he, like them, just trying to manage me, to keep the unseemly parts of my life hidden until it was socially convenient to reveal them? The final, successful test flight of the Seraph One was scheduled for the Wednesday before the Saturday wedding. It was the culmination of 3 years of my life's work. It was in many ways more important to me than the wedding itself. It was the validation of my true self, the girl in the garage, the builder, the engineer. That morning, I was at the hangar, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. Eris was at the control console. I was on the tarmac, running the final pre-flight diagnostics. Liam was supposed to be there. He had promised. It was our moment. He never showed up. At the exact moment the Seraph One was lifting off the ground, a silent, graceful marvel of engineering, my phone buzzed with a text from him. "So sorry, babe. Your mom called an emergency wedding meeting with the florist. You know how she Island had to be there. Looks like you guys are killing it. Talk later." I looked from the text message to the drone, my drone, soaring silently into the clear blue sky. And in that moment, I understood. He hadn't just missed a test flight. He had made a choice. And in that choice, I saw the heartbreaking truth. In the collision between my world and his, he would always, always choose the path of least resistance. He would always choose to appease them. The girl in the garage was on her own. The successful test flight of the Seraph One should have been one of the proudest moments of my life. As our prototype drone soared through its complex flight path with flawless precision, Eris and I and our small team had erupted in a chorus of cheers and champagne. The acquisition was now a certainty. The contracts were being drawn up. Within a matter of weeks, Ether Dynamics would be acquired and my life would be irrevocably changed. But the victory felt hollow, tainted by the bitter taste of Liam's absence. His text message, so casual, so dismissive of the most significant professional achievement of my life, was a betrayal that cut deeper than any of my parents' insults. It wasn't just that he had missed it. It was why he had missed it. An emergency meeting with the florist. A manufactured crisis created by my mother. a woman who considered mismatched napkins to be a five-alarm fire. He had chosen her world, the world of superficial, high-stakes aesthetics, over mine, the world of real, tangible, world-changing creation. I didn't go home that night. I stayed at the hangar, sitting alone in the quiet, cavernous space, the magnificent seraph one resting in its cradle like a sleeping silver bird. I thought about the ring on my finger, the beautiful, gear-shaped ring that was supposed to symbolize the perfect meshing of our two worlds. But our worlds weren't meshing. They were grinding against each other, and I was the one being worn down. When I finally saw Liam the next day, on Thursday, 2 days before the wedding, I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I was eerily calm. "You missed it," I said, my voice flat. We were in the perfectly decorated, impersonal living room of my parents' house, where I had been summoned for yet another final fitting of the wedding dress. He had the grace to look ashamed. "Issy, I am so sorry," he said, reaching for my hand. "Your mom was in a total panic. She was convinced the peonies were the wrong shade of white. It was ridiculous, but you know how she island. It was just easier to go. Easier." That one word was a confession. He was choosing the path of least resistance, the path of appeasement. He was so terrified of the conflict with my parents, of upsetting the delicate social balance of his own world, that he was willing to sacrifice my biggest moments to keep the peace. "It wasn't just a test flight, Liam," I said, pulling my hand away. "It was everything. It was the culmination of 3 years of my life. It was the validation of the very person you said you fell in love with." It was at that moment that my parents walked in, and the conversation I had intended to have in private became a public execution. "Isabella, there you are," my mother said, her voice bright and brittle. "We need to talk." My father stood behind her, his arms crossed, his face a mask of stern disappointment. This was an ambush. "Liam, darling, would you excuse us?" my mother said, not looking at him. "We need to have a private word with our daughter." Liam, to my utter astonishment, just nodded and walked out of the room, abandoning me to the wolves. "Isabella," my father began the moment the door closed, his voice dripping with condescension, "your mother and I are concerned. We have been watching you throughout this wedding planning process, and we are not pleased with your attitude." "My attitude?" I asked, a bubble of incredulous laughter rising in my throat. "I'm sorry. I'm finding it hard to have a good attitude while my entire identity is being systematically dismantled." "Don't be dramatic," my mother snapped. "This is about your future. A future you seem determined to sabotage. We have given you a golden opportunity, a chance to be a part of a respectable family, and all you have done is complain. You are ungrateful." Then came the ultimatum. "We have spoken to Liam," my father said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "We have expressed our concerns about your suitability, about your lack of polish, your common interests, your clear discomfort with our world. We have given him an out, and we are now giving you a choice." My mother stepped forward, her eyes cold and hard. "You will walk away from this wedding," she said, her voice a quiet, venomous hiss. "You will tell Liam that you have realized you are not right for him, that you cannot fit into his world. You will do it quietly and with dignity. We have even drafted a small but generous trust fund for you, $100,000, a parting gift, to help you get back on your feet and, perhaps, find a life more suited to your station." I just stared at them, my mind reeling. $100,000. They were trying to pay me to disappear from my own life, to save them the public embarrassment of having a mechanic for a daughter-in-law. "And what if I don't?" I whispered, the words catching in my throat. My father's face hardened. "Then you will be cut off," he said, his voice absolute. "Not just financially. You will be dead to us. You will not be a Davenport. You will be nothing. The choice is yours, Isabella. A comfortable, quiet life on your own, or a public, humiliating marriage that will end in divorce because you will never, ever be good enough for him. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. They weren't just forbidding me from marrying the man I loved. They were trying to buy my self-exile. They were putting a price tag on my disappearance. "I need to talk to Liam," I said, my voice shaking. "Liam has already agreed that this is for the best," my father said. "He is just waiting for you to make the sensible choice." I looked at their two faces, so smug, so certain of their power, so sure that they had finally, definitively, won. And in that moment, I knew I had to see Liam. I had to hear it from his lips. The girl in the garage was about to find out if the man she loved had been dismantled too. I found Liam in the mansion's vast, silent library. He was standing by the window, staring out at the perfectly manicured lawns, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He didn't turn when I walked in. He knew why I was there. The air between us was thick with the wreckage of our future. "They told me," I said, my voice a hollow echo in the high-ceilinged room. "They told me about their offer, about the trust fund, about you thinking this is for the best." He finally turned, and the look on his face was one I had never seen before. It wasn't love, or anger, or even sadness. It was a profound, bone-deep weariness. He looked like a man who had been fighting a war and had just surrendered unconditionally. "Issy, it's not that simple," he began, his voice raspy. "They're right," I said, cutting him off, a cold, sharp clarity piercing through my heartbreak. "Aren't they? This is what you think. You think I'm not good enough." "No," he said, slamming his glass down on the polished mahogany table. "That's not it. I love you. You are more than good enough. You are better than all of them combined. But you don't understand the world I live in. It's a machine, and my family, your family, they are the biggest gears in it. They have the power to grind us to dust if we fight them." "So, you're not going to fight?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You're just going to let them win? You're going to let them buy me off like a racehorse that's gone lame?" He ran a hand through his hair, his expression tortured. "This wedding, it was never just about us, Issy. It was a merger, a business deal. My father's company is in the middle of a massive expansion. Your father's firm is a key investor. If this wedding falls apart, if we cause a public scandal, the entire deal could collapse. There are hundreds of millions of dollars on the line. People's jobs. My family's legacy." I stared at him, the final, devastating piece of the puzzle clicking into place. This was never about my suitability. It was about his. He was the one who was trapped. His entire life, his inheritance, his future, it was all contingent on him playing by their rules, on him being the perfect, polished, sterling heir. And the mechanic from the wrong side of the tracks was a complication his board of directors, our parents, had decided to eliminate. He was choosing his cage. A beautiful, gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. "So when you missed my test flight," I said, the realization dawning with a sickening certainty, "it wasn't just because my mother called a meeting. It was because you were already choosing. You were choosing them. Their world, their rules. He couldn't meet my eyes. I thought we could have both," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I thought we could get through this. And then, once we were married, once the deal was done, we could have the life we wanted." "There is no after, Liam," I said, the last of my hope dying. "This is it. This is the life. A life of you constantly appeasing them, of me constantly being erased. I can't live like that. I won't." I slipped the beautiful, custom-made engagement ring off my finger. The platinum felt cold against my skin. I walked over to the table and placed it beside his half-empty whiskey glass. The two circles, one of metal, one of liquid amber, sat there like symbols of our two broken worlds. "Your parents have made their choice," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "And you have made yours. Now, I'm going to make mine." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading anguish. "What are you going to do?" I'm going to do what I've always done, I replied. I'm going to build my own future. And this time, it won't have any room for broken parts. I walked out of that library, out of that house, and out of that life. I didn't take their money. I didn't want their blood-soaked peace offering. I got in my car and I drove. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I was moving forward. That night, I sat alone in my quiet, empty auto shop, the closed for renovations sign still hanging crookedly on the door. The acquisition of Ether Dynamics was scheduled to be finalized in 2 weeks. The papers were being drawn up. The life I had built in secret was about to become spectacularly, powerfully real. And I was about to be very, very wealthy and very, very alone. The wedding, my parents had informed me in a cold final text message, was still on. It would be repurposed as a celebration of the new Sterling Davenport business partnership. They were cutting me out of the picture so completely that they were still having the party, just without the bride. The arrogance, the sheer, unmitigated gall of it, was breathtaking. And as I sat there, in the quiet darkness of my garage, surrounded by the tools of my trade, a new plan began to form. It was a wild, audacious, and deeply satisfying plan. They wanted a show. They wanted a performance. I decided I would give them one they would never, ever forget. They thought they were celebrating a merger. They had no idea they were about to witness a hostile takeover. The 2 weeks between my departure from the Davenport mansion and the day of the non-wedding were the most intensely focused of my life. I did not mourn. I mobilized. The heartbreak was a cold, dense star in my chest. But I didn't have time to collapse under its gravity. I had to build a new solar system around it. My first call was to Eris. I told him everything. He listened in his usual quiet, intense way, and when I was finished, he said only 5 words. "How can I help you win?" He immediately put me in touch with Aether Dynamics' high-powered corporate legal team. I sat down with them and explained the situation. Not the emotional details, but the strategic ones. The acquisition was imminent. My personal net worth was about to explode. I needed to structure my new reality, and I needed to do it fast. For the next 10 days, I lived in a conference room. We established Phoenix Aerospace, my new holding company. We created trusts, planned tax strategies, and laid the groundwork for my future. I was no longer just an engineer. I was becoming a CEO. I was learning the language of the world my parents and the Sterlings inhabited, not so I could join them, but so I could beat them at their own game. While the lawyers were building my corporate fortress, I was planning my grand entrance. The wedding was being held at the Hawthorne Grand, a place of almost mythical exclusivity. It was a fortress of old money, with rolling green lawns, a grand ballroom, and a strict, no-nonsense security team. Getting in uninvited would be impossible, but I had no intention of going in through the front door. My grandfather, the eccentric aeronautical engineer, had been a member there for 50 years. I had spent bored childhood afternoons exploring every inch of the property with him, and I knew its one great secret. Behind the 18th green of the golf course, there was a large, flat, beautifully manicured clearing, designated as a VIP helicopter landing pad. It was rarely used, a relic from a more ostentatious era, but it was still there. A private, unguarded back door into the heart of their world. I called a high-end charter helicopter service. I booked their sleekest, most impressive machine, a Black Bell 429, for Saturday afternoon. I filed the flight plan myself, using my newly formed company's name. The destination was listed as a private landing, fully authorized. No one would question it. My plan wasn't just to show up. It was to make a statement so loud and so undeniable that it would permanently alter the power dynamics of their universe. It wasn't about the money. It was about the machine. They had scorned me for my love of engines, for my greasy, unladylike passion. I was going to arrive in the most magnificent engine of them all. I was going to descend from the sky like a Valkyrie, a goddess of their own forgotten machinery. The final piece of my plan came together on the Friday before the event. The acquisition of Ether Dynamics was finalized. The wire transfer hit the Phoenix Aerospace corporate account. The number had so many zeros it looked like a line of code. It was a staggering, almost incomprehensible sum. But the number itself wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the name on the press release that Eris's team was preparing to send out to every major financial news outlet at precisely 3 p.m. The next day, the exact moment the celebration at the Hawthorne Grand would be in full swing. Ether Dynamics acquired by Sterling Croft Industries in landmark deal. Lead engineer and co-founder, Isabella Davenport, to helm new aerospace division. They hadn't just cut me out. They had inadvertently made me one of the most powerful new players in their own game. That night, alone in a hotel suite overlooking the city, I laid out my outfit for the next day. It wasn't a wedding dress. It was a custom-tailored, dark gray flight suit. It was simple, practical, and more powerful than any jewel-encrusted gown could ever be. I thought about Liam, about the man who had loved the girl in the garage but had been too afraid to stand up for her. I thought about my parents, who were about to host the biggest party of their lives, a celebration of a future that, unbeknownst to them, I now owned a significant piece of. They thought they were celebrating a victory. They were about to be served with an eviction notice from reality. I felt a strange, calm sense of pity for them. They had spent their entire lives polishing the exterior of their world, never realizing that the real power, the real engine of change, had been humming away, silently, in the garage next door all along. The phoenix was about to rise from the ashes of my old life, and its wings were going to create a hurricane. The day of the wedding that wasn't a wedding dawned with a perfect, cloudless sky, the kind of brilliant blue that feels like a promise. For my parents, it was the promise of a successful social merger, a public cementing of their place in the upper echelon. For me, it was the promise of a reckoning. I spent the morning not with hairdressers and makeup artists, but with my flight crew. I met the pilot, a calm, professional woman named Eva, at the private airfield. We walked through the flight plan, the approach to the Hawthorne Grand, the timing. Everything was precise, perfect, and under my complete control. As I changed into my flight suit, the simple, powerful act felt more sacred than any bridal ritual. This was my true skin. This was who I was. At 2:45 p.m., as the guests were arriving at the country club, sipping champagne and making polite, meaningless conversation, we lifted off. The ascent was smooth, powerful, a quiet surge of energy that I felt in the pit of my stomach. As we climbed, the world below shrank, the sprawling suburbs and winding roads becoming a neat, orderly map. I could see the Hawthorne Grand in the distance, a jewel of green lawns and white columns, an island of curated perfection. From up here, it looked so small, so fragile. Inside the helicopter, I was calm. The years of doubt, of hurt, of feeling small and insignificant had vanished. They were replaced by a cold, clear, and absolute sense of purpose. I was not the girl they had tried to erase. I was the engineer who had built the machine that was now carrying her, like a queen, to reclaim her kingdom. At precisely 3 p.m., Eva began our descent. The first sign that something was happening on the ground would have been a sound. Not a loud, obnoxious roar, but a deep, unfamiliar, rhythmic thrumming, the sound of the Bell 429's powerful rotors cutting through the placid afternoon air. The guests on the terrace, my parents, Liam's parents, Liam himself, would have looked up, their brows furrowed in confusion. A helicopter? Here? Then, we would have emerged from behind the tall cluster of ancient oak trees that bordered the golf course, a sleek, black harbinger descending from the heavens. The sound would have grown, a deep, resonant whir that would have drowned out the string quartet and the polite chatter. All eyes would have turned towards us. The party would have stopped. Eva brought us in with a breathtaking precision, hovering for a moment over the 18th green before setting down on the manicured landing pad with a gentle, final sigh. For a long moment, nothing happened. The helicopter just sat there, its rotors slowly winding down. A silent, black exclamation point on the pristine green lawn. The entire party was frozen, a tableau of champagne flutes and slack-jawed disbelief. Then, the side door slid open, and I stepped out. I was not the bride they had rejected. I was not the daughter they had hidden. I was a figure of pure, unassailable competence. My dark gray flight suit was zipped up, my hair was pulled back in a simple, no-nonsense ponytail, and my eyes were hidden behind a pair of dark aviator sunglasses. I walked, with a steady, unhurried pace, away from the magnificent machine and towards the stunned crowd on the terrace, the soft grass of the fairway under my boots. I saw their faces as I got closer. I saw my father, his face a mask of utter, profound bewilderment. I saw my mother, her hand clutching her pearls, her perfectly made-up face pale with shock. And I saw Liam. He was standing with his parents, and the look on his face was one of dawning, catastrophic horror. He knew. In that instant, he knew this was not a coincidence. He knew this machine, and the woman walking away from it represented a world of power and success he had just traded away for a life of quiet, comfortable compromise. As I reached the edge of the terrace, a wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Who is that? What's going on? Is that a Davenport?" My father found his voice first. "Isabella?" He choked out, his voice a strangled whisper. "What is the meaning of this? How did you get here?" I slowly took off my sunglasses, letting my calm, steady gaze sweep over my parents, over Liam, and over the assembled guests. "I flew," I said, my voice clear and carrying easily in the stunned silence. "You always told me to find a more suitable career, Dad. I thought aerospace engineering might fit the bill." It was at that exact moment that the phones began to buzz. A collective electronic hum spread through the crowd as 100 synchronized news alerts hit 100 synchronized screens. The press release had just gone live. I saw my father pull out his phone, his brow furrowed in annoyance at the interruption. I saw him read the headline. I saw the color drain from his face. I saw his hand begin to shake. I saw him look up from his phone, his eyes locking with mine. And in their depths, I saw the complete and utter collapse of his entire world. The grease monkey, the family embarrassment, the girl who was too poor to marry, had just become one of the most powerful people in his entire universe. The merger they were celebrating had just been upstaged. The real merger, the one between my mind and my machines, had just been announced, and its shockwave was about to level everything in its path. The aftermath of my arrival was not a loud, dramatic explosion, but a quiet, chilling implosion. The perfectly curated atmosphere of the party dissolved into a thick, soupy silence, punctuated only by the frantic, whispered exchange of information as the news of the acquisition spread like a virus through the crowd. The name Isabella Davenport was on everyone's lips, but it was spoken with a new, unfamiliar tone of awe and disbelief. I watched as the power dynamics of the room rearranged themselves in real time. Men who had looked through me with polite disinterest my entire life were now staring at me with a new, calculating respect. Women who had whispered about my unfortunate career choices were now looking at me with undisguised envy. I had not changed. I was the same woman who had been deemed unworthy just 2 days before. But the numbers on my balance sheet had changed, and in their world, that was the only thing that had ever mattered. My parents were frozen, 2 statues of regret standing amidst the wreckage of their own making. My father looked at me, then down at his phone, then back at me, his mind clearly struggling to reconcile the daughter he thought he knew with the aerospace magnate described in the Wall Street Journal alert. My mother seemed to have shrunk, the proud, imperious posture gone, replaced by a fragile, bewildered slump. They had spent a lifetime judging me by their own narrow, materialistic standards, and those very standards had just rendered their judgment utterly, laughably obsolete. They had deemed me too poor, and I had just been revealed as wealthier than they could have ever imagined. They had deemed me a failure, and I had just achieved a level of success that dwarfed their own. Liam was the epicenter of the implosion. He was surrounded by his family, but he looked completely, utterly alone. His parents, the powerful Sterlings, were looking at me with a mixture of shock and what looked like admiration. His father, a shrewd and pragmatic businessman, was already doing the math. He understood what had happened. He understood the scale of the opportunity his son had just fumbled. Liam's face was a canvas of conflicting emotions, shame, regret, and a dawning, horrifying understanding of the true cost of his own cowardice. He had chosen the safe path, the path of least resistance, and in doing so, had walked away from a future that was more real, more powerful, and more valuable than the gilded cage he had chosen to remain in. I didn't gloat. I didn't make a speech. I didn't need to. My arrival, and the news that followed, was the only statement that mattered. I simply stood there, on the edge of the terrace, and let them absorb the new reality. After a long, agonizing moment, my father, his face pale and drawn, took a hesitant step towards me. "Isabella?" he began, his voice raspy. We didn't understand." "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm, cutting through the silence. "You didn't want to. There's a difference." I then turned to Liam. Our eyes met across the stunned crowd. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt a profound, bottomless pity for the man he could have been, for the love he had been too afraid to fight for. I gave him a small, final nod, a silent acknowledgement of the end of our story. Then, I turned my back on all of them. I walked, with the same calm, deliberate pace, back across the lawn to the waiting helicopter. The crowd parted for me as I passed, a sea of bewildered, respectful faces. Eris, my partner, was waiting for me by the open door of the helicopter, a triumphant grin on his face. He had arrived by car, as planned, to witness the final act. He handed me a single, long-stemmed white rose. "The Phoenix has landed," he said quietly. I took the rose, and as I stepped up into the helicopter, I turned one last time to look at the party. It was over. The guests were beginning to leave. A quiet, awkward exodus. The string quartet had packed up their instruments, and my family, my parents, and the man I had almost married, were standing alone on the terrace, three small, insignificant figures left behind in the ruins of their own celebration. As the helicopter lifted off, ascending back into the brilliant blue sky, I didn't feel a sense of revenge. I felt a sense of cosmic, perfect, and deeply satisfying justice. I had not crashed their party. I had simply shown them that they had been at the wrong party all along. The real celebration, the one that truly mattered, was just beginning, and it was happening 1,000 feet above them, in a world they would never be invited to enter. It has been a year since my helicopter landed on the pristine lawn of the Hawthorne Grand, and in that year, I have learned that the best view is always from the cockpit of your own life. Phoenix Aerospace, under the umbrella of Sterlingcroft Industries, has become a leader in the aerospace industry. The Seraph One technology has been a game changer, and our company's valuation has soared. I spend my days not under cars, but in boardrooms and R&D labs, leading a team of the brightest engineers in the world, building the future I had always dreamed of. It is challenging, exhilarating, and deeply fulfilling work. I found that the skills I learned in the garage, patience, problem-solving, and an intimate understanding of how complex systems work together were the most valuable assets I could have brought into the corporate world. I did not change who I was to become successful. I discovered that who I had been all along was the very key to that success. My personal life has been a quiet, steady process of rebuilding. I sold my grandfather's lake house. The memories were too intertwined with Liam, with a future that had not come to pass. I used the money to buy a large, beautiful piece of land in the mountains, a place with clean air and a vast, open sky. I am in the process of designing and building my own home there, A house of glass and steel and warm wood, a place that will be a testament not to my family's history, but to my own. I have started dating again, cautiously. I find myself drawn not to men of a certain pedigree or wealth, but to men of a certain character. Men with passion, integrity, and the quiet confidence that comes from building something of their own, whether it's a piece of software, a handcrafted table, or a well-tended garden. My relationship with my parents is quiet. They are still in their house, still living their curated lives, but the foundation of their world has been cracked beyond repair. The news of my success, and the public nature of it, was a humiliation from which their social standing has never quite recovered. They call on birthdays and holidays. The conversations are stilted, filled with the ghosts of unspoken words. They are proud of me now, of course. They boast about their aerospace CEO daughter to anyone who will listen. But their pride feels like a foreign currency that has no value in my new economy. It is too little, too late. We are family by blood, but we are strangers in every other way. And Liam, I have not seen him since that day. I heard through the grapevine that the Sterling Davenport business deal did eventually go through, but it was a shadow of what it was meant to be. The scandal of our broken engagement and the subsequent revelation of my own success had tarnished the Davenport name. My father's firm lost credibility. Liam got his merger, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. He is now a senior executive in a massive, impersonal corporation, living the life that was chosen for him. I sometimes wonder if he is happy. I hope he island. But I also know that the kind of quiet, authentic happiness we almost had is not something that can be found on a balance sheet. He chose security over soul, and I imagine that is a very lonely trade to live with. The greatest lesson I have learned is that the world will always try to put a price tag on you. It will judge you by your job title, your bank account, your family name, but your true worth is not something that can be appraised or acquired. It must be built. It is built in the quiet hours, in the lonely garages, in the relentless pursuit of the things that set your soul on fire. My parents were wrong. I was never too poor to marry Liam. The truth is, his world was too poor to afford me. It lacked the currency that truly matters. Courage, authenticity, and the willingness to fight for the things you love. I was never the broken songbird. I was the phoenix, waiting for the fire. And from the ashes, I learned how to fly. Have you ever had to build your own definition of success, separate from the expectations of others? What did that journey look like for you? I would be honored to hear your story in the comments below. If this story resonated with the engineer, the artist, the builder in you, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more true stories about taking control of your own narrative. And please, share this video with anyone who might need a reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is build your own wings and fly away. Thank you for listening. May you always have the courage to trust your own engine and to fly to a destination of your own making.